And thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Stuff That Matters. Today we are together in person and we are joined by Mike Leach. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm glad. This is exciting. Come up here to Rock Hill and hang out with you guys.
This is awesome.
We're excited to have you, Mike. As our podcast has grown, we always are thinking of who would be an awesome guest. And
so you went with me.
Yeah, you've been on the list for a long time, to be honest with you.
Pan out. No.
So we had all the awesome people. But honestly, you know what I do for New Hope. We've known each other for a couple years. And in the work that I do personally for New Hope with not only other provider agencies, but state agencies, payers, you're one of the great people doing work in the child welfare space. And I thought it was important that we, selfishly, that we have you on so you can kind of share your story, your experiences, you know, what you're doing now in your new phase or your new chapter. But in all honesty, I've met a million people and you're top of the list of great people doing work.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
You were the same, yeah.
I appreciate it big time.
Let's not go too crazy.
Yeah,
tell for folks who don't know, Mike, why don't you give a little bit of your origin story? Obviously, again, we all kind of came to know each other through the South Carolina DSS system, but maybe take us even before that. What led you to be a leader of that huge institution, and what got you into child welfare? What got you interested in helping kids and families?
Oh, that's a long story.
Yeah.
That's
here we go.
I've done this a couple times, so I can give you sort of. So, you know, I think that originally when people ask your why, right? I think that's when those questions get asked a lot, and I always go back to my mother, who was a forensic child sexual abuse investigator.
Wow.
So she did the physical exams for children who've been sexually abused in northern Nevada or some in northern California.
Like a child advocacy center, or
yeah,
a hospital?
it was a hospital,
Yeah.
right? And there was an arm where there was a sort of one of her colleagues who did sort of the investigation, you know, the talking back and forth, getting the answers from the child, and she would do the physical exam. And that her, you know, she's a nurse by trade and background, and that all through growing up. So I got to hear her come home and, you know, vent to my dad. Probably shouldn't have been hearing
Right.
stuff, but like got to hear those kinds of things and the stories of her having to go to court and to defend her work to make sure that a bad guy gets put behind the bars who,
Wow.
you know, hurt a child.
Wow.
And, you know, she did that till I think I graduated. I think she was doing that. And then she went on to do, you know, she was an assistant professor and she did other things at the med school and all that. But I saw her fight for children, and I knew that sort of that was somehow I was going to be in the child serving space.
Yep.
And that's where I, you know, went to grad school and graduated college in California and went to grad school at Trevecca Nazarene University in Nashville, where I got my marriage and family, master's in marriage and
You
family
guys,
degree.
I didn't realize you guys
Yep.
had the same
Wow.
Yeah.
credentials.
So that
Oh,
was
now you're definitely top.
there we go. See, man. And honestly, I just want to do therapy with children and families, and that's what I did at Vanderbilt at their outpatient clinic for many years. And I did mobile crisis, so I got to go out to jails and hospitals in the middle of the night. I loved the 4 a.m. to noon shift or the midnight to 8 a.m. shift because you got to see
You got it all.
and get to meet some really cool people out there. And while I was at Vanderbilt, I got asked to do a project with child welfare. I didn't know a whole lot about child welfare. And it was around assessment and planning and working with the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. And so I did that for a couple of years and then got sucked into the system and had a lot of different roles within Tennessee Department of Children's Services. So independent living director, a lot of work around CQI, systems integration, and then I ended up, my last role in Tennessee before I came over to South Carolina, I was the deputy commissioner. And that's when all the many years of us being in that Brian A. lawsuit, we exited at that point in time, which was exciting because the people that I learned from had done a tremendous job in Tennessee for so many years in making the system, be one of the best in the country at that time.
So most normal people don't know that pretty much every state child welfare system is probably under some kind of prolonged class action kind of lawsuit. I don't know if that's the right word. Explain Brian A. and why that was maybe such a monumental thing to actually get on the other side of these things.
So there are probably about half the country right now is in some sort of consent decree or settlement agreement or sued by somebody, and it's usually children who've had bad experiences within the system, and they're represented by folks, and then there's organizations that sue the state and take it to federal court. Brian A. in Tennessee started in 2001 and ended in 2018. I can tell you though, you go, that's a long time. But on average, they do last about 17 years. And so there are some states in the country who have just exited over the last couple of years, DC jurisdiction, New Jersey, others who've been in for 25, 35, 40 years kind of thing, right? But systems get better, and then depending on a lot of circumstances, they may get worse and they may get sued again. Brian A. was to Tennessee one. We exited when at that same point, 2019, Governor McMaster was looking for a new leader at South Carolina Department of Social Services, and it was a match, and we worked out well, and I inherited Michelle H. So I inherited a lawsuit that it was a settlement that was 4 years old at that time in 2019, 4 or 5 years old at that time. So I got to go down to federal court and meet Judge Gergel and the monitors and the plaintiffs quite frequently. And all those going to court, and everybody has they want the same thing. They want a better system.
Right.
Yep.
They want what's best for children and families. Sometimes we all go about it a different way or want to go about it a different way. And you just have to work together. If it's working, figuring out how, we're all aligned and trying to make the system better for the children and families we serve. Sometimes across the country, they're contentious and they're fighting each other. I don't see how that's helpful.
That doesn't seem to get anything done.
Other times, and it costs a lot of money, and to me, it's just like, let's just figure it out. Let's come to the table together like this, and let's talk about what we can do to make this work, right?
Yep.
I think some people would say some of those things are helpful. Others would say they're not so helpful. I do think
the lawsuit dynamics.
I do think that
It gets attention.
It gets attention. It potentially can get money from the general assemblies in those states,
Right.
Which ultimately has an effect on what you can do within the system. But I think that I think it can move a system that's behind in ways to catch up and to be better. Do I think it's going to make it the perfect system? No. But I do think it helps progress the system faster than maybe it would.
Yeah, and I've always had a mixed relationship with child advocacy groups, even though I consider myself a child advocate. It's kind of my whole life has been dedicated to it, but not a formal advocacy group. I think it's always my differentiator is if you are advocating to make a better system, I'm on your team. If you're advocating just to tear down systems, I probably can't get there because I struggle the practical realities of how that makes kids better and safer. I struggle with. So yeah,
I'm with you. I honestly, I'm all about, I think, transparency. I'm all for advocacy, but let's do it the right way. Let's do it where we're aligned.
right.
I don't think people are in the work to not do a good job.
Right.
I just think they're in, it's funny, when I came to South Carolina, people were, the negative connotations, the negative things about the system. And I had to tell people very quick, I said, y'all, these people in the system are amazing and they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
It's not the people. It's the bureaucracies and the lack of services and the lack of supports for staff and the families we serve that are causing all the problems. So let's fix that.
Right.
And let's make sure that we support the people because they're in it for the right reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
I got a buddy of mine who works in a different state, different system, but similar issues. He talks a lot about some of their direct care staff in the state system to hire somebody. It was like a 120-day process. And it's because you got to do, we all get it. You want background checks. You want people to be drug-free. You want to hire reputable people. But for something to drag on for 3 or 4 months to make a hiring decision, how are you going to compete with
The private.
the private sector? And you're just not. And And he sat at a very high level, and if there were, he would have staffing issues at certain facilities, and he would say, we don't have to rip down the system, to your point.
Right.
We got to change the system. We've got to be able to compete with the private sector. The intention's good, but we can't put the brakes on everything we're doing, and we can't just besmirch an entire system to get where we want to go. That experience that you have in those two different states and jurisdictions, it probably brought you into what you're doing now, correct?
Yeah, and to your point, right? I think that a couple things that I focused on, and it was interesting. I think people thought I was a little crazy, right? So I said,
To take the job?
well, to take the
seriously,
job.
yeah.
No, to take the job. But I think that the other thing was, as we got into the job, was right. Like if I put an emphasis on staff and wrapping around supports, the numbers are they'll get better.
Yeah.
All the other numbers
that's all
that
you
you're
do.
shooting for, even if that's all you do, the numbers you're shooting for will get better. Now they're not going to get to the 95% or the 100%, but they're ultimately going to go up. And that's what we did. The other thing we did was somebody said, well, you're $75 million in the hole. Okay. And we've asked families now to pay for their own services. And we've asked families and staff and everybody to say no to things. I said, you know what? Stop that. You're going to say yes to all that. You're going to pay for services for families. You're going to pay for all that kind of stuff. Even without the money, guess what's going to happen? On the back end, we're going to have cost savings. We're going to have some savings because these families have gotten what they need sooner.
Right.
Our staff aren't overwhelmed with caseloads that are out of control. And our financial situation will ultimately be better.
Kind of right sizes itself.
Totally, and it worked. And there was a little bit more to that, but at the end of the day, like you need to make sure that your staff and the families, you're saying yes, and you're helping them get what they need, right? I left after right around 6 years in that role. I think the average tenure from previous research, I think in those roles has been about 18 months. I think probably it probably has gone up since. I think somebody's doing a new research thing on that. But people don't last long in these jobs, a variety of reasons, right? Turnover with governors and changes in those things. But the work is hard. Bad things happen, and somebody's usually sort of at the end of that. I was exhausted and needed to shift towards my family, my wife, taking care of myself,
Right.
From just a physical perspective, mental health perspective, and started getting into other things, including working at Think of Us, where I'm the chief external engagement officer, and I get to work on federal policy. I get to work along some amazing, brilliant colleagues that understand sort of the federal perspective of child welfare, and really kind of shape some things from that angle, which is new to me.
Right.
The federal angle and the state stuff they're two different worlds.
Very
Right.
different,
And
right?
they're not connected very well.
Right.
And so I get to now see it from that perspective and learn a lot from other people and get to see the other states. I also get to work in different states and around different policies, bills, laws, things like that. And that's exciting to be in the work still.
So real quick, one of the things, this is probably a way oversimplified Mike O'Connor view, but sometimes I hear of things in South Carolina, North Carolina, where I predominantly built relationships and systems needing to change or something needs to get better. And I always ask this question, like, well, what state's doing this very well? And can't we just copy that? Is that a way oversimplified view?
No, people.
Or is that doable?
No, people. It is doable with funding and resources
Yeah, there
and
you go.
potentially lawsuits, right? Like people, when asked that question all the time, they go, "Who is that?" And it's like, well, it's New Jersey, right? It has been for a long time.
That's doing it the best.
They're doing it the
Jersey.
best,
Okay, interesting.
and they've also been under one of these class action suits for a
Right.
very long time. But they also have had funding come in, and they've really niched out sort of behavioral health services and support services and wraparounds for families better than other states have, right? So potentially not going into a juvenile justice system, into a child welfare system, but getting the help sort of in that middle lane.
Yeah.
People do that, but they've done that really well. They've had strong leadership for a very long time. And when they do shift, it's, after 8 years of service usually, and then that next person is ready to go, and they just keep it going. That's when you hear it's been very consistent for a very long time. And a lot of it has to do with that service array.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Real quick,
yeah, do it. Do
no,
your
two
thing. I'm
things. So,
chomping at the bit here.
first of all, I think one of our kind of values synergies with you has always been the focus on the frontline staff, and I do love, even just in some of your kind of while you were director and in your role now, we could always tell you loved the frontline folks, and now it makes even more sense hearing
Right.
your story that you came from the front line and that you were running out at midnight chasing kids around town, and so like your respect and adoration for the people doing the work on the ground is really evident, and I think that's and we have the same thing. Mike and I say all the
Yeah,
time,
right.
especially when you're in a field like ours where the front line get paid the least, have the hardest job,
High stress.
by a country mile.
Stress.
That if you can somehow, again, even if it might look like you're not doing an A plus B equals C equation because you're so focused on workforce development and workforce health, but so many good things are downstream from having a strong, frontline staff. So we've always just loved that you focus on that because those folks just get crapped on literally and figuratively like all the time, and it doesn't do anything good. Because I always get worried too, just in the human services field in general, that if we don't realign this, that this is an honorable work and that this is a
It's
viable
valuable.
career and that it's that it's a good thing, then
We're going to run out.
we're going to run out of people who want to do this work in a generation, and I don't know where we're going to be. So like just elevating frontline staff, I think, has always been, and it seems like that was a really intentional. I don't know if that was actually part of the lawsuit, or if you're like, well, we're going to get to some of those lawsuit things by just having a stronger workforce. But I remember you always touting like turnover numbers are starting to change, and because we're in the relationship game, and so if you're just cranking through people and they are
Outcomes will
leaving
not
the
be
second
good.
they're done with this prolonged training, the whole system just sucks. So I've always loved your focus on frontline
Yes,
staff.
thank you.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Matt from New Hope, COO. Hope everybody's doing great out there. I don't do a lot of these video talk to phone things because I'm awkward and they're a little awkward sometimes. But I think the last time I did one, we had a big announcement that we were expanding into the state of West Virginia. So I did think, given what I want to share today, that it might be fitting to go ahead and try one. So New Hope is thrilled to be announcing that we are officially expanding into the great state of Tennessee. We are going to be bringing 2 new adolescent treatment programs to Tennessee, hopefully on the outskirts of Nashville, which is an amazing city, to serve some of their youth that right now are unfortunately being served hundreds of miles away from home. Tennessee, like other states, are struggling with that kind of top 1% of high acuity, high risk, high complexity youth. And those are the youth that New Hope wants to lean into. So we are thrilled. The partners that we are working with from the department just could not be better. They are fully aligned with our vision and our values of what good looks like for these kids and how we can do things differently. So we are beyond pumped. We've been talking about this for almost a year and a half, so I'm thrilled to finally announce it. There is a job posting that is live right now for a program director. So if you know somebody in the greater Nashville area or who wants to relocate to the greater Nashville area, please look into that and hit us up because we want to find an absolute rock star leader to help bring this project to life. So stay tuned. The next 6 to 12 months are going to be super exciting as we find properties, hire staff, probably about 50 people in general will be joining the New Hope Tennessee team. And it's just awesome to even say New Hope Tennessee. So let's go.
Yeah, you're the exact, absolutely. I had the pleasure of touring a trauma-informed court in New Hanover County, North Carolina. The Honorable Judge Corpening runs that court. And it's a pilot project in North Carolina, and he's totally embraced it. But I asked him that question. I was like, well, who's doing this really well? And he identified the state of Florida has had trauma-informed family court, forgive me, for a long time and does it very well. I don't know if that's something, when I say trauma-informed family court, is that a concept you had heard of? Are you familiar with it?
No, I'm not. I know family courts or dependency courts across the country are there's a lot of differences on one, how they work, the laws they have to abide by, how they look and support children and families,
Right.
What they're doing to make sure that it doesn't feel like an extra burden on people, I think that is something across the country that still needs to be looked at a lot, right? Like, what are the models that are working? How are we supporting these folks? How are we supporting staff in court, right?
Yeah,
Because it can be hard on everybody. Listen, if I had, what I think the future of child welfare looks like, right? I would say that, like, it's just like us taking care of our own kids. Hopefully there's no court. You know what I'm saying? Like,
100%.
Like, I don't have to take my child to court. I don't have to do anything around that stuff. If he gets in trouble, I'm sure he goes in front of somebody, right? But, like, these kids aren't in trouble. But we turn everything around and everything's so legalized, right? That, like, we've created a system that has to do all of these things. And again, there's accountability measures.
Yep.
There's serious decisions that have to be made. It's not normal. So how do you create more normalcy in it, which
Right.
could be that trauma-informed
That's
stuff,
kind of what
right?
they're going
Yeah,
for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they
that's
even have
huge.
some small stuff for like moms and babies to.
Yeah,
hang
they
out
have.
in or something.
If you think of
It's like some very low hanging fruit. It's not even high complexity stuff.
It doesn't have
it's a
to
room like this, and it's decorated for like a pediatrician's office where you have those little half moon things that a baby might lay on and play with, like a rattle.
Right.
Like those things exist in that trauma
Yeah.
family court, and I'm sure I'm not describing it as well as Judge Corpening could, but it blew my mind.
Yeah, everything is not. We create all these systems that doesn't create sort of normalcy and just the average everyday kind of thing for children and families, right? I don't know if they still do this, but back in the day, Hawaii used to, for foster care review boards, right? It used to be like this kind of room, and they'd have food, and people come
They
in
have
and they have
snacks.
a voice.
That's the other thing. They had
right?
snacks.
And they tried to make it something where it was less.
Let's make this less miserable. Like it's not that. It's like what we were talking about before we go live. It's like let's just make this a little less off. Like let's actually view this through the lens of just regular human beings.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not that. It's not that crazy.
Mike, you have the pleasure of interacting with different states. We've already mentioned that. Tell us what's going really well, with where you've traveled, or even with your experience in Tennessee and South Carolina. What's going right? Because sometimes we focus on what's going wrong. What's going right? What do you see?
I mean, I think the system overall across the country, I think everybody sees or realizes that, we need to probably do less of separating families and building and helping build the resources and supports to help families stay together and meet those needs. I think that's a realization that's come since, 2018, 2017, that how do we, and with funding models shifting, right? How do we provide funding for those things upstream so that we're not doing as much of this stuff on the backstream that's even more expensive? Now, there are some, young people with mental health needs, and there's some families that are struggling, and some abuse and neglect that does exist, right? And how do we serve them? We need to continue to figure out what's the best way to serve them. But not everybody needs that. A lot of folks need that upstream concrete support stuff, and just making sure they have Medicaid, and making sure they can get the right services, and making sure there's
Housing
in-home and
right,
housing,
right.
those things, right? Like, I think, I don't know if we're doing that well yet, but we're realizing it, and I think people are trying to figure that out. Right.
It's like basic problem solving, identify the problem, and if we're able to realize what you just described, that's the first step in the process.
But yeah, and some these things. It's always funny when things have fancy terms. When I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like social determinants of health. Yeah. It's like a very fancy way to describe like, is this kid eating, and does this family have the basics? I remember doing in-home therapy in North Carolina at one of my first jobs. And there was this family that was very DSS, DJJ involved. And everybody, you could just tell that the adults that were supporting this family did not like this family, which always drives me crazy. I feel like it's a prerequisite that you have to like the people that you're working with. Like you have to genuinely
Empathy, compassion.
Yeah.
and just think that they're these are awesome people in a tough circumstance. Like, I don't know if you don't start with that, I think it's very hard.
Right.
Because then now you're like separating and it becomes transactional. But I remember they were always pissed off at this family, particularly the parents, and they were just kind of labeled as these kind of lazy, frustrating parents for the system. I remember going into their home and noticing like they had no, and this is like kind of back in the day, they had no working clocks at all. And they were always late to stuff. And I was like, my first act as a therapist is we're driving to Walmart, we're getting some batteries to get to the clocks, just to do some of the basic stuff. And all of these, you know, probably well-intentioned upper middle class people that were judging this family never sat foot in their living room to actually get a sense of like, what's the context of this thing? And to your point, I mean, these were parents that were doing what they could with what they had. And just, I wasn't taught in grad school the clock intervention, but it was a pretty basic, like, let's just do that. Let's start. It is kind of I almost think that everything comes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And everything we've learned since then is all just fancy gobbledygook. But like everything else is just kind of, when you get the baseline, then we can go to the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, I could stick with Maslow and then, you know, Murray Bowen's like family systems theory, right? If like those are the two things, I could like see all this stuff just around those two things, right? That, you know, we had an example. I think when systems are working, here's what you might see, right? Now, not all of it was working in this situation, but I think this is a good example, right? So we had a legislator who was knocking on doors out in rural South Carolina. And she came across a grandmother with the adult children and the grandchildren in the house, and they didn't have water, right? Their well was something was wrong. Just, you know, gross water, all that kind of stuff, right? It was summertime. School would be starting soon. And so they were having to go to other places to get water and all this kind of stuff. Well, you know, the legislator called a bunch of places, a bunch of people, couldn't get the help, right? I thought, that's cool. That's awesome. You're not just trying to give votes, you're actually trying to help somebody, right? Yeah. Well, and which may turn into a vote. But at the end of the day, she called us and you know, we found out the grandmother was getting a service already through, you know, SNAP, right? And so we're connected to her. We, you know, the local county person, I said, hey, you know, let's see what the cost is. The cost of those two children coming into foster care because of something like that would be astronomical. Right. So base it off of that versus what are the options? All right, get a well company. So I asked the county director, I said, hey, go find a well company. She's like, I already got one. I'm like, how do you, we live in rural South Carolina, Mike. We know this stuff.
We know this stuff.
$12,000. All right, that's one option. Get it on the city water for $1,200 plus some other fees, right? All that kind of stuff. Sounds like a great option, right? Let's pay for all that. $1,200, let's say $1,500 to get that parent, that caregiver back all they need, so the children are, so we won't get a phone call and potentially cost us so much money. Now, that's where I think the system needs to be.
That kind of flexibility, is that, would you call that, what would you call that?
Well,
flexibility?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, it was so that the local folks would have said, we don't have the money for this.
Right.
Right. Which they probably do somewhere. Somebody just has to give them permission to spend money on something they wouldn't have normally spent money on.
There you
right?
go.
And all you have to do is document, you spent money on this instead of having to pay this much money over time. And I can get you the math. If you need the number to prove that documentation, we can get all that. But those are the stories that I most cared about, is my team being creative and unique
There you go.
and helping families before they got deeper into the system. And at the same time, does grandma need childcare for those kids? Let's figure out how to connect her to that.
Right.
You know, and those are the things that we want to do, right?
Well, that's I think it's leadership.
Leadership.
Which also, again, if we don't make these jobs appealing to good leaders, we're not going to get leaders that lean in. Because I think that's, so I have two like philosophical things that I'm curious where you stand on them, or what, you know, now that you've had even a national exposure. So one is the movement, like you said, there's kind of a healthy movement towards let's slow down on the TPR stuff, but there's also sometimes the terminating parental rights, but then there's a little bit of an extreme of like, let's remove that mechanism entirely. And then the privatization of child welfare is also an interesting thing that, I don't know if it's a phenomenon, I don't know if it's a movement, and I think some states are going all in, and then some states are really resistant. So on those two kind of philosophical things happening in child welfare universe,
Put them right on that.
What do you think?
So
What's your position platform?
I do think across the country there are, I think over the last forever, I think that there's been too many just general removals. And I'll give you an example, right? When I got to South Carolina, there was close to 6,000 kids in care, and we had a really low entry rate, which was good, right? But I was like, why are there so many kids in care? Well, we weren't doing the work
On the back end.
timely getting them back with their families. And then I also looked at it going like, should we even have removed some of these kids, even with a low entry rate, right? So it's like balancing that, figuring out who really is in need, what are, the abuse, is it significant enough to need all that? And then, again, the termination of parental rights thing, I think that it's a tough one. I think I always lean towards making sure that we're giving the family every utmost chance to turn it around and give them that opportunity. And sometimes some of the situations they're in, or the addictions or whatever it may be, are going to take a little bit longer than what a 15-month time frame may be, right?
Is that kind of the standard plan?
Yeah,
timeframe?
yeah. I mean,
year and a half.
yeah. It's about that. I think every year in a lot of southern states, you hear legislators always proposing something much shorter, 3 months or 6 months, and I always say no way. I will never work in a system that is going to separate families like that. I have seen families turn it around. Maybe not for that one child, but maybe for that second child, right? And so I lean towards that. Now, again, if it's severe abuse and there's a pattern of that, then I'd lean towards the other way on that, really. So it's kind of dependent on the situation, dependent on that. But I really am a family guy. I really like to try to build on that. Now, when it comes to privatization of child welfare, whether the state or the county can do it better than a private provider or vice versa, it's yet to be seen, because I don't think these systems, even at the highest level, are functioning probably at the best they need to be working with them. And that's whether it's privatized or not privatized. People will go, well, if it's privatized, it's going to cost more. That you get better care, all that stuff. With the state, maybe costs a little bit less. You may not. I don't, either way, like it really depends on the leadership and who's running the system and what they know. And if there's money coming into the system and there's resources for that system, I think it can be either way.
It's probably hard to get a apples to apples comparison of a state that's got privatized child welfare versus
the outcomes are, let's just say, I don't think the outcomes are any better.
We haven't run the experiment long enough, probably, / it's kind of a wash.
Is there a watermark, I don't know if that's the right term, to when
that started?
Is it 10 years ago? I don't even know.
I don't know. Kansas did it a long time ago. Not a long time ago, but I remember when I was still in Tennessee, I think they had gone that route. I think Florida's gone that route.
Florida's gone that route pretty heavy. Texas,
I think there's probably some others. Again, I've never worked in that system. It's almost the same thing of like the North Carolina sort of county-based system versus like a state administered system, right? Like I think a state administered system is much easier to run and probably has better outcomes than the county-based. I don't have anything to say that, but I also wouldn't work in a county-based system because, like, there's just
it feels like a disaster.
There's just so much, like you have no control over. You feel like, So,
well, I think, and you and I've talked about, again, I do think one of the things that we push back on a lot is kind of this all or nothing thinking, because I just think it's an oversimplification, some kind of blended world, right? So on the private side, I look at it through, we can probably make faster workforce decisions, definitely kind of a little bit more nimble on the private side, but a profit motive and public health do not always go hand in hand either, so I could see a myriad of reasons why that's got a boatload of problems waiting for it too. But I am a fan of any systems that's trying to just do different. You got to have at least a little bit of respect for.
Yeah, I think the systems that are kind of with the status quo, whether that's in state or working with your providers, and that, I think that's not good. So I think anytime you're looking at different, unique, trying something else that may lead to better outcomes, go for it. Right? Go bold.
I have another kind of national question, because you and I talk about this a lot. Do you see, it feels like particularly post-COVID, and we all first kind of met around this problem of older adolescents that are kind of multi-systems, difficult to place youth. I always call it like the 1% of the 1% of kids that are probably 90% of our energies and resources are used on figuring out what the heck do we do with this 17-and-a-half-year-old who's 6'2", has in 25 foster homes, we go out of state. And so much, a disproportionate amount of time and energy are spent on those kids because they have an outsized impact on the system. And those are the Friday night phone calls that sometimes go all the way up to the governor's office saying, we had a bad night. I'm assuming that feels like every state is dealing with that. I'm curious what you see, and part of what New Hope's, part of our growth, if
It's been around that.
it's just been trying to lean into that, but try to lean into that in somewhat of hopefully a creative and effective and non-institutional kind of way. But I'm curious what do you see with the older adolescents and how do systems respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting during post-COVID, there was a lot of groups trying to get leaders together, right, to one, just be there with other folks who are experiencing many of the same things. And initially it was just trying to make sure your staff were safe and families were safe with COVID. And then it moved to, just the sort of placement issue that, all across the country you would read, through news media of kids in, hotels or in offices or disrupting multiple placement after multiple placement, right? And again, in each state, it was a very small percent of the
actual
young people,
number.
the actual number, but it was taking up a lot of energy. It was causing a lot of chaos, and at that same time, you'd read about the youth mental health crisis, right? Mm-hmm. I do think there's something to what we've seen through post-COVID and some of the young people that we've seen in the system. And here's my thing. I think that prior to COVID, through many years, I think there had been a decrease in adolescent mental health treatment, adolescent inpatient psychiatry, all of those things. And I think Medicaid rates hadn't increased in a while. I think there were a lot of services shut off in South Carolina, 2014, 2015. I mean, I think the label fraud was thrown around. They shut off pretty much all in-home type services, right? It was interesting, 2015 to 2018, what do you see? 2,000 or 3,000 extra kids in custody at that point in time, right? So I think that all has something to do with when that hit and post, no one was prepared because all of that stuff was cut out, right? A reduction in group care, congregate care, all of those things, just psychiatric care, kids going to ERs, but there's nowhere to go after that. And I think that it just kind of led
perfect
to
storm,
right?
Perfect storm.
And I think that it made people think about how we got to look at Medicaid differently and what they can provide, and also what services and supports families need uphill. And building out that mental health, behavioral health component in each state is absolutely necessary. Crucial. Like without it, I think the states who probably had, if you look back, who probably had stronger models and some of that stuff were still there, probably did a little bit better.
Came out on the other side a little bit healthier.
But after 2009, 2010, when everything sort of fell out, right? The economy, guess what was cut? Behavioral health services.
Correct.
Juvenile justice services.
Yeah.
All of those things that have led, you'd go like, that was so long ago, Mike. No,
It's not that long ago.
that stuff we're still dealing with.
It's the same
today.
generation that we're,
we're within that generation.
Well, I think, I think about this a lot. Obviously, we spend a lot of our time in the most downstream corner of the sandbox you can possibly be. Kids come to New Hope after 25 other placements and things like that. And I do think, and this might not be a popular opinion, but like at some point, and I do think there should be a both and scenario where there's resources enough for both, but we really need to go all in on like who's the 5-year-old right now that in 10 years from now is going to be calling Mike, and like how do we just, I think even statistically, and you're what maybe last question for me, because you seem to be leaning in a lot to like AI and analytics and predictive stuff. I can kind of predict who's most likely to end up being a referral to New Hope, right? Based on how they're doing in kindergarten, based on how their family's doing right now. And at some point, if we keep spending all of our resources on the 17-year-olds who are exiting care versus the 4-year-olds, we are gonna just keep doing this thing. Like it just feels like we are on that hamster wheel versus again programs that are truly even identifying like 6-month-olds and 9-month, like some of that early childhood stuff gets me the most excited. It just bums me out when I look at how much it's funded compared to the high. And I get it, you're not getting a Friday night phone call about a 9-month-old, but that's coming if we don't invest there. So I hope you don't have to choose, but if we had to choose, at some point we need to cut. We need to like pivot and say, we're going to prevent the next generation from coming in.
I love that. No, and I just don't think everybody has the will, the want to, even maybe the know-how. I think there's a lot of ideas out there, but I think people have to own that. And I think the resources have to go at the federal level, at the state levels to say all that stuff. I was telling Mike earlier that I'm the chair of the Foundation for Success with South Carolina IMPH, and it's really focused on the early childhood suspensions and expulsions that we were seeing in South Carolina. And the task force, made up of all the experts and the right people in the room, I'm just there, right? Are getting together and coming up with a plan, right? To what are the things we need to do to reduce that now and over time, and why I love the work, why I think it's really cool, and I agreed to participate, was because like those are the children that are potentially going to end up in the child welfare system and even further down the juvenile justice system, right? 100%. And so like, what are the things we can do to strengthen the family, strengthen the child at those early ages? And I can tell you at the same time, with that plan and all the stuff over the next few years that hopefully they'll work to implement, we're going to also come back to the idea of like, hey, we have a little bit of it, and that's all we're going to fund. Instead of like, so we're going to serve the 10% of people when we really need to serve the 60%, and we need to go all in. And so if we don't, again, have the will or the investment or the want to, this cycle's going to keep happening.
To that point, and then I think we've taken a lot of your time. We'll get to Patrick. I attended a conference years ago, and there was an economist who worked in Colorado who presented to a bunch of juvenile justice and child welfare systems folks about looking at those two systems from an investor putting dollars into the system. And he came out with the only programs that we should fund are nurse family partnerships, where you identify at-risk young moms who are who are pregnant.
It's like home builders,
right? That kind of stuff. So anyway,
but so think about it though, right? And I don't know North Carolina numbers, but right, there are a lot of that stuff happening in South Carolina, but it only ends up being 10 to 15% of the total population, right? So whether it's federal dollars or state dollars coming in, it only hits at 10 or 15% of the population, right? And that may not even be the most vulnerable part of that population, right?
Correct.
And so yeah, those things work, but are we willing to put the time, energy, effort, money into scaling those things to where they're actually making a huge difference?
Right.
And show on the back end of what that's doing, right? Hopefully you would see less children in juvenile justice over time, less children.
When it does take time, like it
takes time.
So much time. You're talking about a generational experiment. So just because we start investing in home builders, friends of the children, some of these really cool things for the 4-year-olds, doesn't mean that we're not getting the 17-year-olds now. There's going to be this 20-year gap. And so to your point, it takes a lot of will and a lot of time.
And you know what, lived experience, with the work at Think of Us, we utilize a lot of lived experience, a lot of young people, right, for our work to try to help change, shift policy, law, inform the work, inform what's going on. And I think that's crucial in making sure that, lived experience, whether it's families or young people or whoever been, in the system with whatever it is, have a voice in saying this is what we really need and how we get it. I think that helps move things, right?
100%.
Yeah. Well, I know we could do part 2 and part 3. We might have to because there's a whole bunch, like adopt, post-adopt. There's a million things we could talk about.
We'll rent out more rooms in this co-working space. We'll just do it in various rooms to record. You're certainly incredibly generous with your time. And you were telling us earlier you're actually driving to Florida tomorrow for a baseball tournament. So I'm sure you'd like to get out of here, get home and pack and rest up. But we hit you with this question before we got here. Final one for me. Again, just your chance to encapsulate articulate your overall message, which you've certainly been doing for the most part of this interview. But for you, what is the stuff that matters?
You know, I think you guys are really good at it, and it's relationships. I think that's what matters, right? Building trust, building relationships. And, you know, like I could say all the good things that the team did in South Carolina with the numbers, right?
Right.
And I say it, here are the things we've accomplished. But at the end of the day, the thing I'm most proud of is being a partner, a friend, a colleague to those folks in the field. And when people would say, hey, you care and you really made me feel good.
Think about that.
And I really like being here because of that, right? Like I want people to feel good. I want people to enjoy what they do. You know, I want people to, and I think it is relationships. I think it's building relationships. And I'm not always good at it, but I do care about people. And I think that comes back from my mom, who was always fighting for a certain population. You know, it comes from my stepdad, who's African American, and so a biracial family. So I got to see things from a lens that a lot of people didn't get to see, right? So I think that shaped me just being caring and compassionate towards folks and wanting to hope that what's best for them, right? I want what's best for anybody, everybody, right? And I think that's what I enjoyed most, is just building the relationships. I think that's what matters to me.
Well, I think it's a great way to end our conversation today. And I think you're really good at building relationships, you know, from our experience, and we can't thank you enough for your time.
Yeah.
It's been a blast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Awesome.
Thank you.
Loved it.